Welcome to the Visual Effects Notes podcast. Today's episode is sponsored by ftrack and Action VFX. ftrack is an Academy Award-winning project management, production tracking, and media review platform for the creative industry. I've been using ftrack for the last 6 years, and it has helped me with all my visual effects projects. Forget about all the messy spreadsheets and the shared documents. ftrack is the best way to create a visual effects pipeline and to manage and communicate with your team and clients both locally and remotely. Please visit ftrack.com to know more. This episode is also sponsored by Action VFX. Action VFX is the best place to get high-quality stock footage. I've used Action VFX in game cinematics, short films, trailers, and commercials. They are the best stock footage I've ever come across. Be sure to check out their amazing Christmas sale where the entire library is 30% off. And remember that after the Christmas sale, you can also use the promo code Hugo's Desk for 10% off. Please visit actionvfx.com to learn more. And now on to the show.
Hi everyone, welcome to the latest VFX Notes podcast. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and I'm joined today as usual by Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hey Ian, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Hugo, I think it's pretty obvious just from your light setup what we're about to talk about. That is super cool, man.
Yes, for people listening to the podcast right now, I can give you like a glimpse of what's happening in my room. I have a very green room at the moment.
A green room with running code down the bookshelves.
I have code going on my screen and everything. It's like I'm all plugged in. I'm all ready to go. Yes.
I love it. We are obviously talking about The Matrix. Partly, I guess, because there's a brand new Matrix film from the Wachowskis called The Matrix Resurrections. I've seen it as of recording. Hugo, you haven't seen it yet.
No, I haven't. I'm going tomorrow. I'm going tomorrow to see it on IMAX, 2:00 in the afternoon. So I have not seen it. I have been tried to stay away as much as I could. I watched the first trailer. That was it. I kind of like plugged off. I wanted to not be spoiled on anything. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Right. I won't give any spoilers in this podcast. We might do an episode on that film down the track. But what we are doing is revisiting a film from 1999 that, for me personally, is just huge. And that's from the visual effects point of view. It's also from a getting into film and filmmaking point of view. It was shot in Sydney. I actually went to see some of the shooting of it in the city, which I don't think anyone realized at the time. You know, there's Keanu in Sydney and people were like, that's cool, but they didn't realize what was being made. And it just has actually had a huge influence on my writing career as well. What about you, Hugo? What can you say about The Matrix up front?
Yeah, I mean, yes, this film was mind-blowing at the time. I was like 19 or 20 years old or something like that when I went to the cinema to see it. I was right at the middle of my university degree, my art degree, and I was doing films myself. I was doing short films and things like that. And at that time, I was actually doing my master's film, which was a fighting film as well. It was a ninja film, so I was like really plugged into these kind of things. And my jaw dropped. This was the biggest experience I've had in the cinema of all times. Like watching this, I was blown away. I went to see it like a few days after, right away. I think this film was the biggest influence for me and for action films and for sci-fi films of all times. Like this was the pinnacle of all of that in 99, you know. 99, which by the way is I think one of the best years of cinema of all times, you know, like of all times.
Yeah.
I think it's both 97, 88, 99. I think leading up to the millennium is like the best moment of cinema that we've had. I think maybe it's because everyone was worried that everything was going to go and end. So everyone was trying to do it as yeah, exactly.
I forgot about that.
People were like pushing as much as I could. You know, this film, there's no, like, both the film itself, going to the cinema to watch it, and also the DVD as well when it came out, which had a lot of extras and a lot of behind the scenes. It was also unique on that sense. It was one of my first DVDs, and I watched and watched and watched, and yeah, the film has a huge impact on at me at the time. 19-year-old Hugo, or 20. I think I was 20. I think it was 19 or 20, something like that. Yeah.
Do you think we're going to obviously talk about the visual effects? We're going to talk about bullet time. We're going to talk about this stuff. But there's something about the making of this film and just the continual making of the Matrix franchise, which just oozed cool and oozed grunge, didn't it? And some of that came from the Wachowskis, who are here making this quite big budget film. Granted, it's in Australia. But they're kind of like, doing their own thing, telling their own story. They don't seem to be following some sort of studio guide to do it. I don't know if that was a thing.
It definitely was. You see, John Gaeta has a T-shirt on the behind the scenes, and he has a T-shirt saying, when he's on the subway doing some stuff on the visual effects side, he has a T-shirt saying "fuck Hollywood" or something like that. They were really against the system at the time because they were so off the system, So, no, I think Australia also was actually, not that it was on purpose. It was because of budget reasons and also because of the new studios in Fox Studios, but I think being in Australia really helped because they were very far away from Warner Bros. And they were very far away from the executives. And I think it kind of helped the artistic integrity of the film because they were so far away, I feel like this film, which is probably the most bizarre high-budget film ever made, most likely, because it is very bizarre. It's very weird, but it's really high budget. It's like $65 million, which is quite a lot. But these two guys, the Wachowski brothers, which of course now they are the Wachowski sisters, they're not brothers anymore. But they, coming really famously and very hot from Assassins, they were the screenwriters there, and also from a really good film called Bond, which I really like that film. It's an amazing film. Everyone should go and see it if you haven't watched it. It's a really small budget film, $5 million. And then they jump, coming from Chicago, baseball hats, shorts, like there's just different types of directors. They're like these geeks, they're like trying to merge all of this influence into these films. They are, they're obsessed with Kung Fu, with John Woo, with Frank Miller, with Philip Dick, Japanese animation. They're trying to put cyberpunk there, Alice in Wonderland. They're just like merging and making a melting pot of all these influences that they've loved when they were young and from their past of comic book writers, and it's so fresh. I think that's why it connected so much with us, both with young Hugo and young Ian. This is the most coolest and fresh and new thing ever, isn't it? If you think about it, like these guys are cool. That's the thing, the whole film is coolness the whole time.
I mean, looking back, I don't think anyone realized what it was. That's one thing. And even the trailer doesn't even really give away stuff. I mean, there's a partial bullet time sequence in the main trailer, which I think is really fascinating to give away the big, huge visual effect. But you could watch that trailer and not know what the film is about. You could watch the film and not necessarily know what it's about. But, this is more in the context of the visual effects. Someone was asking me today or the other day, is there a film since The Matrix that has blown you away like that? And they meant both in terms of visual effects and just also reaction. And it's a struggle. It's a struggle to think of something that has blown you away in the cinema like that.
Well, this is our Star Wars, isn't it? If you think about it. This is our generation Star Wars. Like, of course, our parents had Star Wars, the first one, the Hope, the 76 one, and now we have the Matrix. I don't think there is, Ian, actually. I just watched it last night in 4K. They just released like a 4K Blu-ray in HDR, completely remastered and completely like all touched up. And it's incredible how this film, which is 21 years old now, it holds up. Even in 4K on like a 2-meter screen, it holds up. There's a couple of moments where you see a little bit of a blur, and you see a little bit, mostly, we had this conversation offline, because they probably comped everything in 2K. This most likely they would have never comped in 4K, so now they've upped. And so there's a difference between when you watch the film, you see the scan 35mm, which was to 4K, so that looks crisp, and then of course the visual effects look slightly more blurry. So that's the only thing you see, the disconnects you see on the film. But the film really holds up. I think that's why it's so seminal, because the pacing works really well, the action, which, by the way, there's almost no action. If you think about it, the film has very few visual effects, big sequence. It's a much more, there's a lot of conversation, there's a lot of dialogue, there's a lot of plot, there's a lot of pause moments, there's a huge amount of detail getting into the pace of the film. The film ramps up really quickly, and then it calms down, and then ramps up, and it calms down. I think that's why it's so seminal, and that's why it's so impressive, because it's different from the films of today, which often have the problem sometimes of having too much action for too long, you know. Sure. I think this film never has a 45-minute long sequence, you know, never has that. It pauses, it stops, it breathes, you know, so, which I think it's really good in that sense. I really love it.
And just to talk about the shooting of it, because you mentioned, you know, obviously shot on film. So Bill Pope was the DOP here. And, I mean, during that
we
era,
actually talked about a film, we forgot about him when we were talking about Shang-Chi. He's the DOP of Shang-Chi as well. Yeah. I completely, because his name is different. He's now called William Pope on the film.
Oh, okay.
So I didn't notice. So apologies for all listeners that we didn't really made the connection to The Matrix, but he's the same DOP,
And I think at that time, in particular, Bill Pope had a bit of a run of these, I'm going to say visual effects films, although in some way The Matrix isn't, but we'll get to that. He obviously worked on the prequels as well. And I just think what he was doing, which also felt different, Hugo, tell me if you think this is right or wrong, he really was translating a real cinematic vision from the Wachowskis into frames. Because if you look at that art book that you have, and if you look at the storyboards, they just look like finished frames. Yeah. And I know people will say, well, that's what storyboards are meant to be, kinda. But in the case of The Matrix, it's even more, isn't it?
It is. Well, it isn't, like you said, people are going to say that this is just like storyboards are, but forget, this is 99. In 99, this was not very common to do this kind of thing. If you like listeners of the show, of course, if you watch the video, I'm going to be putting some images of this book on the video. This book is fascinating, The Art of the Matrix, because it has all of the drawings, all the concept arts from Jeff Darren, and also all the storyboards from Steve Scott Rose and Colin Grant and a bunch of other people. And it is the entire film storyboard. It's a graphic novel. It's actually a really, really detailed graphic novel with no balloons. There's no text on it. It's only the graphic novel. And if you look at this storyboard, the shots almost replicate themselves frame by frame. Like almost all the big shots, the helicopter with the bullets, the time spin on the roof, you know, Trinity jumping and doing her timeline, all those shots, even she flying through the air from building to building, all these shots are already drawn on this storyboard. And this came from one thing. When Warner Bros. Bought this script, they didn't really understood what they bought.
Probably not.
So they were like, well, okay, we know we bought something cool. They say this on the documentary. We know we bought something cool. What is it? And so the Rossi brothers actually decided, because they were comic book people, they decided to do a comic book to explain, and that really helped. It made everything so much easier. Bill Pope knew exactly how to frame this. Everyone knew what we were trying to do. Everyone knew what they were trying to do. And I think that's why they match so perfectly. And also, like, the visual style of the storyboards are also outstanding as well. And I think it really helped the film. Bill Pope also, you know, he's an amazing cinematographer, and I'm so I'm so ashamed that it's such a shame that he wasn't nominated for the Oscar at the time on the film, because this film is so well photographed. Like when you watch the film in 4K and you watch the film on a big screen, this film is immaculate. Every scene, every shot is like a painting almost. It's a beautiful film.
Yeah, and we could talk about very particular pieces of framing, but one thing I wanted to mention, which was a kind of about that being blown away thing, and which is also about why people went to see this twice, if not more, was when they worked out that there were two worlds in this film. I mean, some of this is so obvious now after 20 years of Matrix consumption. But in 1999, when you saw it and you sort of went, oh, wait, there's two worlds. Oh, wait, one has a more green tinge than the other. I mean, that's what I remember as a 20-year-old going to. One reason why I wanted to watch it again, because I wanted to see the difference between those two worlds, right?
Yeah,
I think that's another reason why this film was a way of being a blockbuster, being a crowd pleaser, but being an art film, basically, as well.
Yeah. Which was, and you're right, like the color difference, the blue and the green, the blue being on when they are on the real on the Nebuchadnezzar, and then the green when they're in the Matrix. I know people think this is all normal now, of course, because we're so used to visual effects, we're so used to grading, we're so used to changing everything either on Instagram, on phones, on computers, on Premiere, on DaVinci. This was not easy back then, okay, guys? Like this is the thing. This is 99. Obviously, the film was shot in 97, and it was like post-production in 98 and then released in 99. This was not an easy feat to actually go through and give what looks like... At the time, commercials already had this, of course, with the advent of Inferno and the advent of Flame and all those kind of tools that were like popping up at the time, and Elastic Reality and all those tools. But this is not a commercial. This is a 2-hour and 20-minute long film, which they had to really, obviously this is film, so it was of course a chemical process, but that kind of look, that's why it made it so fresh. It looked like the most modern thing you would ever seen in your life, you know. That's why those colors resonate so much. And also it's like a fantastic choice of colors as well. I mean, how much imitated is this film now? How many films have blue and greens just to show this kind of stuff?
Yeah, and it was such a cleanly shot film too, as well, wasn't it? Part of that is the storyboarding that we're talking about. It's not a Steadicam film. It's not a handheld.
Only on
film.
the fight scenes. Only on the fight scenes, and it stays with you. It stops the framing, like when they're in the dojo, facing to face, which is a typical gaming angle. Whenever they have a chance, Bill Pope stops the camera, and then it only moves it when really it needs it. Of course, especially on the dojo, there's the entire sequences with Steadicam, and also when Neo is like racing through the hallways trying to escape Mr. Smith, it also has a lot of Steadicam work there. But it's only when it's really necessary, you know. I think this film was. That's why, you know, you were saying that it's difficult to find another film like this. I think this film was, again, a collection of amazing creative people that come together somehow. For some reason, they came together here, including Bill Pope, including the Wachowski brothers, John Gade, all these external people, all these people that were not the typical people, you know. Like Bill Pope was not a blockbuster DOP at all. He was an indie film DOP almost. The Wachowski brothers only had one film on their belt. John Gate was not a well-known VFX supervisor at the time. All these people are outsiders, and with a very small budget of only $65 million, which is relatively small for the type of film it is, and you know, shooting for like for almost a year, including like B shots and everything. This is like, I think everyone gave their best. That's why the film is so amazing. You know, everyone was like on the top of their game, and everyone knew, even Keanu Reeves, even Kate Moss, like they all knew they had something special. You know, I think even Warner Bros. Knew they had something special. Yeah. They had something different. You know, it was a huge risk.
Yeah. Can I make a very small point? I still think it's a super different film, and of course it was a huge influence. In a very strange way, there was a film that came out the year before, made in Australia, called Dark City, which actually a lot of people compare to The Matrix, but mostly because of the noir thing a little bit and also the two worlds in that film. And I think it's just a coincidence, and I think Alex Proyas did a great job with Dark City. But a lot of people say, oh, what was it? Dark City walked so that Matrix could run, or whatever the phraseology is. But I think they're very different. Anyway, it is interesting just that they were both shot in Australia.
You are absolutely right. The Matrix doesn't come from an alone place. For sure, Dark City that really ramps up to that kind. Especially the first half an hour of Dark City is astonishing, and it has that clinical look and astonishing look that the Matrix has as well. There are other films also that came out around this time that really you could see where film was going. Like if you look at Blade, for example, where you had like action scenes and a very, very small, not a time bulletin, but almost like a time bulletin sequence that it has, a very tiny one. So it had already some visual effects as well merged into it. Blade was not as good as The Matrix, but already had some stuff going on there. So I think obviously the Matrix doesn't come from nothing, it doesn't come from nothing. But it's, I'm glad you said that. Dark City is like one of my favorite films from that time.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so understated, isn't it? Like almost no one talks about it. We should do a podcast about it for sure.
Let's decide to do that now.
Yeah, we decided now. You
know one thing, this same person I was talking to you about, has there been a film like Matrix that shocked you and threw you away? That's not the right word, but blew you away. He also said, "Oh, I love kung fu films," and I have to say, because Hugo, I know this is something close to your heart. I don't think of Matrix as a kung fu martial arts film, but of course, it's a huge martial arts film.
Yeah,
but I kind of like that sort of rolled up into something else. Tell me about your reaction to the kung fu and martial arts.
Yeah, I was a huge fan of these kind of things. Like, I mean, it's no mystery. When I was 18, at school I was doing a ninja film, an art martial arts film over there. So I loved it, and I think the connection comes because the Wachowski brothers were really big fans of John Woo. They were really big fans of of films like Fist of the Legend and those kind of films, and they were so fanatic about those films that actually they contacted the choreographer of those films, of the films from Jet Li and the films of that time. And they actually contacted Wu Ping, which was like one of the most famous people choreographing martial art films. And he brought in his team. At first he didn't want to make the film because, these in Hong Kong, they put out films, like in months, in 1 year, there's like 5 films coming out. So he's like busy. He's busy to go to those things. And then, of course, he read the script and he was really blown away by the script and also by the storyboard. And then he decided to come in and bring his team. And I think that's why the film has such a connection with Kung Fu films, because they actually used all the trickery from Hong Kong, the wire work, which was very new. Hollywood didn't do these kind of films at the time. Of course, now we're all used to it. But the wire work that came from his team, they spent like 6 months training, the actual actors, because, obviously the production wanted to use stunts. And even Wu Ping wanted to use stunts as well, because it's much easier to just use stunt people to do these kind of things. But the Wachowski brothers were adamant that they wanted to be close up to the actors. They wanted to use wide angles. They wanted to be super close with the Steadicam. And so they were adamant, okay, Keanu Reeves, Cameron Roth, like they have to know Kung Fu. So they spent 6 months training, and man, anyone that has watched the behind the scenes can tell you like this thing was painful for these people. It was painful. They had injuries, like Hugo Weaving almost broke his wrist, like Keanu Reeves was already having a spinal surgery before the film. He was even worse. He couldn't even kick on the film. Karen Moss got hurt as well on her leg as well. There's like pain and sweat and tears to go into this, but they pulled it off, didn't they? Because they look amazing on film. There's no facial replacement on this film. There's no facial replacement. I
don't think there is there? I haven't reread the CineSync recently, but
there isn't. I've read it like it's. There's no. At least if there is, it's a secret. Yeah. And if it's a secret, it's the best one ever made. I just watched the film in 4K. You don't notice anything. And I mean, I noticed facial replacements on Shang-Chi, and I didn't notice on this film. So I doubt that they would have the technology. They didn't have Nuke to do this kind of thing. They didn't have the technology at the time to do the facial replacement.
But I guess that goes to a different style of filmmaking, which is blocked to camera to enable principal actors to do it, who are doing these amazing fight scenes. And
not all of them, of course. Not all of them.
I was going to say, when it needs to be a stunt, it's blocked to camera to be behind the actor or in the dark or really frenetic and quick so you can't notice. I mean, that's the history of filmmaking and stunt scenes prior to digital face replacement. So that's a really interesting thing to bring up, because I guess they could have done it. I mean, it did exist. They could.
Joe Silver wanted to do with stunts, and he wanted to do trickery and visual effects, and Sean Gaty was ready for that as well. Well, they're going to try, of course, because they didn't do it before. It would have been interesting if that would have happened, because it would have been probably the first big major facial replacement film in the world. But no, Wachowskis were obsessed. And also, it has to do with Keanu Reeves as well. Let's talk about Keanu Reeves, man. I know you're a fan. I'm a fan as well. He's amazing. He's a good fellow as well.
Not sure. Yeah.
On Speed. Well, we're going to do Speed at some day. But, you know, Keanu Reeves also comes from that side as well. He's a perfectionist, and he's obsessed with getting everything right. And you see that on behind the scenes, on the interviews, on the books, on the magazines, everywhere, where he doesn't quit. You know, there are some shots on the dojo where they did 30 takes, you know, because Keanu Reeves was like, no, I can do it better. No, I can do it better. No, I can do it better. Even the Wachowski sometimes brothers were like, no, it's done, Keanu. It's good. It's good. Don't worry. We'll cut it. And now, no, I can do it better. The same thing goes with the Alway on the end of the film, like the bank, the ending sequence, where he has to do this quadruple kick with a wire, which is one of the most famous scenes. Incredibly, even at the Oscars, when they were announcing the editing for the Oscars, that was the scene they were showing, you know, for the film. That shot, again, Keanu Reeves did almost 30 takes to get that thing to work, you know, to do the four-legged quadruple kick, which any stuntman could have done it probably, much easily. But I think the resilience of Keanu Reeves, the resilience of the team from Weaving, the obsession to detail that they had, that's why it looks so fantastic when you watch it on the screen, because these people did not give up. Even with the accidents, even the problems, they wanted to make sure everyone fought and knew that it was them up there doing the stunts, you know. And even on the subway sequence, there's only a couple of shots that were done with stunts, the most tricky ones, when he gets against the wall, or when he goes all the way to the other, like when Mr. Smith hits him all the way to the magazine vendor, like, and he destroys the whole thing. Those, of course, are stunts, and the guy even got hurt. He actually broke his leg, and even when he did that, the stunt, I can't remember his name. I apologize for that, but. And I think that's why it becomes so realistic. It's this obsession by the Kung Fu, the Hong Kong team, by the team from Weaving, and also Keanu Reeves, and also Wachowski, and also Bill Pope as well. The way he moves the camera with the action, the way he actually lingers on a shot, the way he blocks it and cuts it, it's just astonishing, you know. And I think it has to do with all those factors, and it has to do with the amazing work from the Hong Kong team, and also Keanu Reeves' obsession, and also the editing, man, which won an Oscar, you know. Zach Stenberg, which did the editing for this film, he also did the editing of the other Matrix films, and he worked with Bond as well. He's a collaborator with the Wachowskis. He did an astonishing job. The way this film is cut, and the tempo of the film, and the way the angles were chosen, it's very well deserved that Oscar.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to give a shout out to all the department heads, if we had time. Don Davis as well for the music. That had a lasting effect, I think, on how Hollywood music was done. And
that
then
music is like so recognizable, isn't it? As soon as you hear it on the film, you know exactly what it is.
Yeah.
I know.
Hugo, the only other person I wanted to give a shout out to, and there's so many on the film, is the production designer Owen Patterson, who I just felt brought something really different to The Matrix. It was already a really different film. I remember like hearing him talk about things like the hotel or the building lobby shootout, where he had to like have these replacement pillars, for all this thing. And that's a collaboration, of course, with SFX. But I was like thinking, wow, look what he's got himself into as a production designer. These crazy film where these pillars just get torn to shreds, right? Bring in the new pillars. I remember that on some making of, or him at least giving an interview about it. And I remember thinking, yeah, he got himself into something really different here.
It was, and I think it has to do with Jeff Darren, like the concept art from him, like highly detailed, very, very sci-fi, very steampunk looking, with cables everywhere and little things everywhere. He did an astonishing job from all fronts. That thing is amazing. The pillars thing, they actually had machines to break up all the little bullets holes, and they did a lot of takes for that entire sequence. Like, because that sequence is like a music video. It's like a little music video with propeller heads going. It's like, my God.
Yeah, I did feel like that at points in the film, like that the Wachowskis had imagined this scene with this track,
Yeah.
And whether it was a Don Davis one in the end, but often it was a song they repurposed, a Massive Attack song or whatever it is, right? Yeah. And so I can imagine the joy of a director like coming up with a sequence, knowing the music in your head, and then actually seeing that on screen. Would have been amazing for them.
Completely synced with the music as well.
Yeah.
Completely synced. Yeah. But so, talking about Owen Patterson, his job was monumental in this film, wasn't it, Ian? Like, because you have all the hallways, you have all the sets and the Nebuchadnezzar, but then, man, think about all of the factory, the Matrix power plant, all those things, the pods. It's just the amount of sets that they've built. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Well, I guess that's the big challenge, was that he had a real city, but it's the Matrix city to design. And then he had much more organic, but also mechanical like structures to design. So I guess maybe it was a production designer's dream to have both sides to do. But yeah, monumental, as you say.
So it's funny that you're saying about the city, because at the time they had the world's biggest cyclorama with Sydney, with photos of Sydney on the background, especially when they were like with Mrs. Smith on the interrogation scene at the end with Morpheus. All those sequences, the background was not a green screen; it was actually a painting and a print of the city. But because they didn't want to make it look like Sydney, and they had to remove a lot of things like the Opera House. They had to remove a lot of really important buildings and then mix and match buildings and like move them around. So they did a lot of trickery, Photoshop and CG to make that big cyclorama, that huge print, to make it look like a generic city of some place in the United States, So even that has some CG. Even that is... Obviously, now these days we kind of don't even think about those things because that's like an LED screen or something. But which and again, sorry to bounce around there, but there's also like it's so funny that this film actually has a back projection sequence. I researching for the film, Bill Pope actually went in and did the back rear projection sequence like an Hitchcock old movie projection system when they're inside the car going to the Oracle. That entire sequence is a back projection. And,
really?
And I was I had I read an interview with Bill Pope talking about that, and then I found footage about that. So they had a big projector, a 60mm projector on the back, playing back the city landscape going. And Bill Pope talks about this. He talks about that he wanted it to look fake because this is the first time Neo goes to the Matrix after knowing it's the Matrix. So they talked a lot about filming it on a real car, but then Bill Pope thought, no, we need to make it a projection because it's fake. It's Neo acknowledges that this is a fake place. And so it makes it more magical because the depth of field is a bit off and it's really defocused and the car is huge and it's like, it's all a back projection, like an LED projection these days. Yeah,
I had no idea. That's really cool. Well, I guess, Hugo, that's also a good way to segue into the visual effects.
Uh-oh.
And
There's a lot of that.
I mean, we could talk all day about all the other visual effects in the film. There's miniatures, there's morphing, there's creature work.
Full body replacements with the mirror. Like, there's like, some of the firsts of everything, like an Houdini simulation of that mirror. There's firsts everywhere, like Motion Builder, which was called Filmbox. There's like firsts. It's like, this film is like an entire season of your podcast, of your VFX firsts,
But of course, what The Matrix is known for is bullet time. And I think we should spend some time discussing it. Maybe at first, one of the most interesting things is, I think the general public might think that bullet time originated with The Matrix. And of course, everyone in visual effects probably does know that there were hints of frozen time in commercials, in some films, for several years leading up to The Matrix, right, Hugo?
Yeah. Especially commercials, Commercials had a lot. But the thing with this, John Gaten never really said anyone that he invented bullet time. Like, he didn't. He didn't invent bullet time. Although people think that they invented it, wasn't. Like, it was already used in 96 and 90, in 95 and 97. A lot of commercials had it. It was used in a very different way. I think John Gaeta and his team really took it up the notch. They made it that sharp, photorealistic thing that we know today as bullet time, because at this stage it was always a very blurry, messy, shaky thing. Like, you would see it because they would have rigged the cameras, they would have shot it, and that was it. And so the cameras might have not been completely aligned, and the focuses might not be completely aligned. There was always issues. And so John Gaeta went in with his team, and they fixed all those little problems. They found a way to machine the specific parts to actually make the rig. They found a way to do the color correction between the frames. And just like, I really recommend everyone to go, and I know I'm shoehorning a podcast of Ian as well here, but I will do that. Everyone should go and listen to the podcast that Ian has with Frank Gallego about this, about the making of the rig, because it's fascinating to hear it. Especially, there's one thing that my jaw went to the floor. I didn't know that until I listened to your podcast, Ian. They shot this in film. The cameras were in film. They were not digital cameras, which meant that they had to actually do it in stock and then wait a couple of days for the processing of the film. This is so scary. But I don't even imagine. But yeah, going back to what you said, he perfected this thing by using, little small things, like, for example, shooting 1,000th of a second of exposures instead of shooting like a smaller exposure, so that everything was sharp, by pumping in more light so that they could have a super sharp sequence, by connecting real 300 frame per second film cameras on the side so that they could do the connection, and also by interpolating frames between, because they would get the photos and then they would invent about 15 frames using computer graphics to try to do the rest of the interpolation that was missing. So I think, no, they didn't invent it, but they perfected it, didn't they? To a point that this thing is like...
Absolutely. And I am going to give a plug for some Matrix coverage at Befores and Afters, which read all together really, I think, forms an interesting history of frozen moments and bullet time. You mentioned the VFX Artifacts podcast. That's with Frank Gallego. He was from Innovation Arts at the time. And what happened was that we could talk for 3 hours just on this, Hugo. But there was this company called Mass Illusion doing amazing visual effects work. They actually won the Oscar for What Dreams May Come the previous year. And The Matrix and What Dreams May Come were actually kind of being developed at the same time. And there was using a bit of optical flow tools to show some painterly effects. Well, O-Flow also became part of the bullet time stuff. But what the big development was, and you've kind of mentioned it already, Hugo, is bullet time or frozen time until then was mostly like a static view on a person.
Yeah.
As in the person would jump and the cameras would be able to, it could just be stereo pair of cameras could be used to do some reprojections to give them that frozen moment look. But I think in bullet time, what Mannix visual effects were doing, that was kind of the name after Mass Illusion, became Mannix visual effects. They really treated the path of the bullet time as if it was a real camera that somehow had a rocket sled on it and could go around Keanu. So you never felt like you were taken out of the film, weirdly. It's almost like, oh, how did they film that? And that's why I think people are blown away by bullet time. Because it's a visual effect, it's crazy, but it actually feels like maybe they could do it. I always thought that was the power of bullet time.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And that has to do with the fact that they figured out a way to actually have not only, because at the time it was just around, like, maybe like a 180 around an actor or something. Like, John Gate and his team actually figure out a way of spiraling and going up and down, and there's like an actual curvature going through the thing, and it's just like, and that's all kind of, it has to do with the fact that because of their heavy visual effects background, their visual effects brain was thinking, so then they thought, okay, we can, because before people would not put them around as 360s or spirals because they thought, but then we're photographing the camera. But then, of course, visual effects people think, okay, that's fine. We'll just rig the cameras with green screen around and just have a little hole for the lens, and that's it. And that's what they did. They used the entire panels of green screen to try to cover the exact cameras. And also they used visual effects very extensively to calculate. They used the Softimage to calculate the actual distance between the lenses, to calculate the positions of all of it. So they basically ended up doing full schematics in 3D, almost like CAD planning, trying to do the schematic according to the speeds that they needed so that the camera could ramp up and ramp down and go up and go down and go speed up and speed down. So it was all computerized before even it was printed. So they had a full animatic of this thing that they could replicate. They could show the Wachowskis. They could say, okay, do you like this? Do you want a ramp here? Do you want a ramp there? And this is like the first time we have like a full body 3D tracking. They would shoot a stunt double. They would 3D track the guy, and then they would bring it into the computer. They would actually plot the camera move. Once it was approved, then they would fabricate it with the actual rig, which, by the way, they couldn't find. There's no 3D printing in this time, so they couldn't find. So they had to actually buy machines to do the machinery of doing this rig. So the entire thing is a complete merging of visual effects and science, mathematics, to try to bring this over to fruition. And it's fascinating because this doesn't happen anymore. These are, and then of course the backgrounds, which are also very, very high-end at the time. Which
before
are
we get to the
projections.
backgrounds, it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, I don't know if I agree with that, Hugo. There's some amazing artistry and mechanics
don't get me wrong.
And crafts.
Don't get me wrong. I'm saying in terms of the firsts, because these people were inventing and figuring it out and actually having to make up things. It is no secret that it's, I'm not saying it's easier, but it's different now because you have so many off-the-shelf software. You can always use Nuke. You can use Roto Tools. You can use this. You can use that. There's nothing here, so they had nothing. They had to invent. If they needed a plugin, they had to make the plugin. If they needed a software, they had to make the software. That's the complication that I think is so outstanding back then, because now with off-the-shelf tools, you can easily do a time bullet shot. I mean, I just recently did one. I was supervising a commercial a few months ago, and we did a time bullet shot. It was super simple to do it. There was a company that could come over and do it by themselves. They only do that. It's a company called New World Designs, and they come over and they put the rigs, and they have a computer that does everything. It shoots. It's so bad. It's so normal now that we even did cast and crew photos for jokes. We even did time bullet shots with the crew, and they were telling me that sometimes they're booked for weddings and they're booked for corporate events, to do bullet times, So it's like it became a pipeline, but it only became a pipeline because these people were the pioneers. They invented it. So no disrespect to the visual effects these days. I know there's an enormous amount of arts or cinematicians going on now, but I think it's very difficult if you think about it. In 99, there was hardly anything to the consumer level. Of course you had After Effects, but it's like After Effects 4, you had Inferno just coming in. It's difficult to do these things. It's expensive to do these things.
Well, it's interesting you mention it because, in fact, for one of the tests for bullet time, they certainly were trying to use multiple cameras. I think they only had 27 for the test compared to 120 for the main rig. But because of the missing data of a person, lying down and the camera going to the next frame, they were trying to use morphing tools, I think, effectively elastic reality, to do those in-betweeners. And I think what Mannix realized early on, that this needed to be a much more photographic process, rely on the photography, but yes, also interpolation and optical flow to do it. And that extends, Hugo, to the backgrounds, which you mentioned. The whole sequence looks convincing because this is the bullet time shot on the roof, I think we're mostly talking about here, but it's the other sequences with bullet time as well.
Yeah, there are four of them. Yeah, there are four of them on the film, and they're all
they look real because they use real photography and photogrammetry techniques, which was it's hard to think of back then, but it was actually new in terms of the approach for creating these virtual backgrounds.
Yeah, this was... Remember, guys, everyone listening here, guys and girls, there's no pipeline for projections at this time. There's no pipeline like we have now. Well, let's just do a projection in Nuke. There's nothing like that. This is all based on a SIGGRAPH paper from 97 from Paul Devebek and also George, I'm going to butcher his name, George Bershukov, I think that's his name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. And this is something called the Berkeley Tower Flyover image-based rendering. And this is where it comes from. It's like this focus of taking a couple of photos to trying to then project into simple geometry, what we now take for granted as a projection system. But back then, it was really groundbreaking. And it becomes real, of course, because the genius about this is that you're taking photos of the set with the real lighting, with the lighting the DOP wanted, and then you project it back into simple geometry. So the lighting is baked in. There's no ray tracing, there's no shadows, there's no real-time lighting. But because the lighting is baked in, it's a bit like a video game. It looks real because it is a photo. It's a photo. It's a photo that they are projecting. And that's why it merges so well. It blends so well with the green screen shoots, which, by the way, the green screen, if you look at the behind the scenes and you look at the green screen shots of both Trinity and also all the four sequences and also Neo, they look so real because the green is so even and so well lit and so perfect in terms of keying. And I think it has to do with the fact the tools were so rudimentary back then that they had to make sure everything was perfect because they couldn't rely on trying to do multiple keyers. They couldn't rely on doing a lot of rotoscoping. It had to really key. This is something I miss these days. When I go on set, they set up green screens like no one cares, sometimes they put mixed greens, sometimes they put some parts of the rigs are not even there, sometimes you still see the rigging, sometimes they don't have enough green to cover. If you look at these behind the scenes, every little centimeter of the set is covered in green. There's nothing missing. You can see that they've spent months on this, really making sure because they didn't have a backup plan. They couldn't really go in to nuke and to key this or to rotoscope, it's in a way it's like they were really very perfectionist on this, which we've kind of lost along the way with the advent of really easy tools in visual effects. Not easy, but like simpler. We kind of lost that kind of perfection of trying to capture it on camera the first time, like which they did, at the time.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose there's an acknowledgement that there's a lot of paint work in the classic bullet time shots in The Matrix, because
for the wires,
they're painting out wires, they're painting bits of Keanu from this frame to the next frame. I mean, that's just what they had to do to make that shot look seamless. But the base was there, and it's the shot, Hugo, the rooftop one at least, that blew people away. And why did it blow people away? I suppose we already said this, it's because we didn't know how they did it. It showed Keanu, it's a key story point that he might be the one. And, you can watch it over and over again and see something new in that shot. I just rewatched it before we were chatting, and I think I had almost forgotten about the way that the bullet actually has that trail. I think I'd just forgotten about that, which is a huge part of the
3D trails,
too.
the 3D trails. It's funny that you're mentioning this, because this shot they tried to shoot it on set on the real time because they weren't sure the time bullet would work. They weren't sure because of course no one has ever done this before. So they tried to shoot it for real with the stunt and with wires, and not for real, but with a camera moving around them in super slow motion. They were trying to rig the camera at 300 frames per second. 300 frames per second, yeah. And, of course, it didn't really work. I mean, it looked okay. It looked just like any other John Woo film, It looked like any other Hong Kong film, really. It really kind of shined when we actually see it all together, which is a mix of so many things back then, Like you have full compositing of a CG background with Neo there, full rotoscoping, full paint over of the wires. Like then there's like the trails, like you said, in 3D. The bullets are in 3D. The helicopter is in 3D. It's like the whole thing is like a masterclass of what visual effects would have become in a couple of years later. It's like it's so natural to see a shot like this these days. Obviously, these days it would have just been done fully CG. They would have done a digital human, and then they would have done it in CG. They would have never photographed it for real. Really, like, natural about the shot because of that, because it was shot for real, because it has the emotion of film, because it has so much grain. This film has so much grain, man. I wasn't prepared for this. When I watched it in a projector in 4K, it has so much grain. It's such a grainy film. It's really fascinating to see it. It must have been so difficult to key this into.
But we're basically saying bring back the grain, aren't we, Hugo?
Yeah,
we're not saying
we are. I like grain.
We're saying bring it back.
I guess it's a nostalgic thing, I think. No, but Ian, people were blown away because this thing became the concept of what we now know as a virtual camera. The concept of time splicing, the concept of virtual camera, the concept of movements that are impossible. Like all these things came to fruition with this shot. This was the shot that started it all, which, by the way, at the very beginning, before they were thinking about time bulletin, as I was going deeper into this, I went quite deep and found out new things that I didn't know about. There was a moment on this production that they were actually contemplating attaching actually power rockets to the actual rig so that they could go faster.
Yeah. I think that's why I said rocket sled before, because I think I'd read that was something they were going to do. Yeah.
That was, yeah. And they actually had conversations with ILM and conversation with Digital Domain about these things because they were supposed to be involved on the project. But then it kind of didn't work out. Not for several reasons. Not just because of the rocket, because it was impractical, but also I think the approach that would have been made for this film probably would have been impractical in terms of budgeting because ILM and DD were so big at the time. I don't think they would have been able to actually accommodate such a low budget. And I think at the time they really had to get outsiders, like this entire thing was made by outsiders. You had D-Film, Animal Logic, all companies that were not usually very well known at the time. And not to the level of ILM and DD, those were the big ones. And this is just like done by other companies, which now are very famous. Obviously, some of them don't exist anymore, but which is unfortunate. But yeah.
I was going to say the other side of the visual effects work in this film is that it isn't just digital visual effects or CG. There's some incredible miniature stuff. I've always loved that helicopter smashing into the side of the government building and creating the ripple wave, where, yes, that's obviously a digital visual effect. But I'm sure, Hugo, you found some of the behind the scenes for the helicopter crash and glass smashing. And I mean, it's just a joy to watch that sort of stuff, right? Because it again feels photographic because it is. And then it's given this kind of digital look with especially the wave thing, which just of course suits the Matrix.
Yeah. It's outstanding. Yeah. That behind the scenes, you have an article on it on Before and Afters, and it has the video as well, which I will put on the video version of this podcast. You'll be watching it now as we speak. That sequence is outstanding. It has a combination of everything, and you have like a scale 1:1 of the helicopter, then you have also a scaled version of the helicopter, which I think is 1:14 or 1:12 or something like that. Then you have, of course, green screen, very good green screen, by the way, like very well lit. And then you also have
your green screens.
Well, because these are so well lit. These are so good. Yeah. Like, I'm not used to this anymore. I go on set now and you have like this poor man's green screen on the corner, and then anyone is just like saying, we'll just rotate it later. Like, no one even cares anymore, you know. Like, well, we'll rotate it. We'll rotate it. We'll send it to a third party. They'll rotate it. You know, like, no one even cares anymore.
Can I say something about that helicopter scene? While I was writing that story, somehow I found the B-roll for that miniature shoot was available on like a stock footage, place. And Warner Brothers had put it there. And so you can buy the stock footage plates, takes for this helicopter shoot, which I always thought was really cool. By the way, those final shots with the helicopter were done by D-Film, which got absorbed into Animalogic at some point. But D-Film also did that amazing, you mentioned it, the stuff coming over his hand, the mirror thing, and into his mouth. Animalogic did the code, which
before we jump into those shots, just one last thing I wanted to just mention about the helicopter before we leave it. One thing I found it fascinating was that they actually were trying to do the ripple in real explosion. They were trying to do that. It kind of worked, and when you look at the plate of Trinity going against the glass, it's a beautiful shot, which is also on the art book. They've done a drawing for that shot as well when she hits the glass. And so it helped with the explosion because you had this kind of like cylindrical ripple effect on the explosion of the glass anyway. But of course, they didn't really work like they wanted, so they had to do CG augmentation for the actual wave effect because they couldn't do the wave for real. But I think that it's really fascinating that they tried for real to do the explosion. They rigged like circles. Yeah, they actually have the schematics. Yeah. And it's really fascinating.
And I'm sure I'm not wrong about this. There is a time when Agent Smith and Neo are fighting, when Neo gets pushed back into a brick wall and he essentially makes a concentric circle smash like that, right? Unless I'm completely making that up.
No, you're right.
So I thought that was a bit of an ode to it.
Oh man, don't talk about like just a little shout out for Mr. Smith, man. Mr. Smith is the best part of this film for me personally. Like, I think that Hugo Weaving, like, he is hilarious. He's so funny on this film. Every time me and Anna are watching this thing, we cannot stop talking the dialogue. He's so hilarious, and he's so good at this film. He's an astonishing actor. I mean, I've always loved his work. Like, he's an amazing actor, even on Priscilla, Queen of the Desert. He's amazing on everything he's done. But on this film, man, my God.
It's like that thing people say right now is he understood the assignment, from the song. But he just got it. Yeah, I mean, I think I say that quote it's the smell all the time, you know. That was a bad
I know.
Hugo Weaving.
Find them and destroy them. Find them and destroy them. He's amazing on every moment, especially the interrogation scene with Keanu Reeves for the first time we see him. He's so funny opening the dossier and like, my God, like this man is on the top of his game, isn't it? When he's playing these sequences, and I cannot understand. I would have given him an Oscar for supporting actor. My God, he's like mind blowing. But yeah, sorry, you were about to talk about Animal Logic, about the code, weren't you? Nah, sorry, I interrupted.
Yeah, well, Animal Logic did a whole bunch of effects in this film, and I'm not sure everyone realizes how much work they did do.
It was a lot. The entire end sequence was all done by them.
Yeah, the end sequence, which I've always loved. But the code is incredible because it clearly was a branding thing that Warner Brothers took on, but it was a very clever way of showing what this world was. Another article on Befores and Afters includes an interview with Animal and the original designer of that code, where he actually says that he basically referenced some cookbooks which had particular characters in them, and you know that's the code dripping down like rain. But Animal Logic then and now is really known as a design visual effects studio, you know, so they weren't just given the concept art and whatever and told to make it. They went away and actually helped design elements for it.
It's so iconic, isn't it? This entire, I mean, the letters on the screen, also like the entire sequence on the beginning when you go through the letters and go into the phone, and of course the end when Mrs. Smith explodes, that was done by them, and also, of course, which is a green screen shot with simulation, and then, of course, the corridor on the green characters. But it's funny how you see how Bill Pope also kind of merged this kind of thing throughout the film, like, because the whole thing was the characters were like, the idea was that it was rain coming down, like the code of rain coming down. They took a long time to get, they had a lot of variations of that thing before they went to that. And there's a lot of rain on this film. There's a lot of rain. If you look at the tunnel sequence where you also see the rain coming down, when you see the building from the top, the wide angle, you see the rain coming down. So you do literally have code everywhere flowing through the film. The film actually has a lot of those little things. You know, the more you read, the more you investigate. You have the code on all the rain, which kind of connects with Animal Logic's work with the actual code on the screens. You also have, like, if you notice, whenever we are like on government buildings, or if you want with Mrs. Smith, or if you want or with the integration scenes, there was always grids everywhere. You actually have sometimes grids on the floor. Sometimes you have grids on the ceilings with the actual ceilings. Sometimes you have grids on the actual floor place of the building of Morpheus. You have like these kind of squares with green and black squares as well. So there's grids everywhere. And that was another thing that famously was brought in by the set designer, Owen Patterson. He brought that grid feeling to the film. So there's so much symbolism on this film, and it really culminates with that Animal Logic sequence, which is now, of course, legendary. That the look of that, which is the ultimate screensaver, I guess, that everyone now uses. Yeah.
For some reason, you sparked mentioning Hugo Weaving, saying he was the funniest thing in this film, and I think he is. But you also reminded me of the funniest scene in this film. Do you know which one I'm going to say, Hugo?
No, I don't know.
And it's the window washer sequence.
Oh my God, yeah.
I mean, how inspired is that? There is just something about it which the audience... I reckon I've watched this film, luckily, about 5 times in a cinema, because they've re-released it, right? And I reckon the audience just has cracked up at that, of course, every time. And I also think like the audience doesn't really know why that's funny, but it just is, right? So.
And then it happens again. Notice how when Neo is pushed out of the pod and goes through the tunnel of water, his hand also does scrubs through the glass again. So you have the same sound effect again on that sequence. No, that sequence is hilarious, and also the dialogue between them too. And they keep washing the windows throughout the entire sequence as they talk. You can't be late anymore, like, and you keep hearing. It's just no. I think that's the tempo thing I was talking about in the beginning of the podcast. The tempo, the way that this film jumps from completely mundane scenes of the daytime of this worker of Neo of Thomas Anderson, and then it jumps into a time bullet scene. Like it has this kind of really nice pause moment that really give you a lot of you can breathe when you watch these sequences.
Yeah.
I think that's why it's fascinating.
I just wanted to wrap up.
Ian, this film has too many visual effects, doesn't it? Like that's the thing. Like it has so many more. We're not going to talk about more. Like as you said, you have the mirror as well. You also have the women in red, the sequence, the freeze frame as well, which is a really cool sequence that you have as well. There's too many to count. There's too many, and we're not going to go into the whole thing.
I only want to give one more shout out because they're still around, but Meg Effects did a bunch of the practical effects in this film. They're a really cool little shop in Sydney, and they did like Mr. Anderson's belly, things like that for the bug going into it, but a lot of other things as well. So I really like them. Great guys down there. So Hugo, we've talked about the visual effects. One thing I wanted to also mention was the legacy of the visual effects, and we've talked about John Gator, but also Kim Libreri was a big part of this film, and of course they worked together on the sequels. Now Kim Libreri is the CTO of of Epic Games, so he has an Unreal Engine link. And John Gator has continued to do a lot of immersive and VR related stuff. Not so much VFX supervision anymore. But the legacy thing you actually brought up a little bit in terms of virtual cameras. In the sequels, I feel like the subsequent companies to Manix and MVFX, which is Escape or ESC, they were strides ahead in terms of virtual humans, digital humans.
Unfortunately, by the way, like those films 2 and 3, especially 2, with the digital humans and the virtual cameras, I don't think they're as successful as the first one because they're almost full CG. And I really think those films are a bit ahead of their time. Like if you think about it, today, if they would have done those cameras and those shaders and that 3D, it would have worked so much better. And there's a bit of an uncanny valley on certain moments when Neo is fighting all those agents, especially that sequence, which looks almost little bit like a video game at some moments. And I just think that they were too early. The technology, the shaders and the 3D rendering was not there. The skin rendering, the cloth rendering, the GI rendering, all those things, if you would have waited 3 more years, it would have been there. Unfortunately, it just loses, especially when you watch it in a big screen in 4K. I just recently watched the second one again. In those sequences, when you jump from the real photography of him fighting Mr. Smith with all the motion control sequences, and then you cut to the full CG versions with digital humans, it just doesn't connect. And I think it's just the technology, which is unfortunate because it's a mind-blowing sequence, but it's just unfortunate,
I might have said this on a previous podcast, but in the sequels, the digital humans, to me, always work really well up close. There is something they were doing with detail, and basically it was because of their universal capture process, UCAP process, which
especially
basically
the super shum, the super punch looked amazing. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah,
but basically it was volumetric capture, sorta back then, right? And I think what's interesting is you're right. If they realize the disparity between the up close Neo and Smith versus further away, they might have designed the shots a bit differently, or something like that. But they
which
were
is now made worse. It's made worse on the 4K Blu-ray because now what you get is you have the 4K scan of the 35mm, which is immaculate. Then you have the 2K renders, and it doesn't connect. That's the issue now. Like now that you're watching it, it's almost like if you watch this as a DVD, it looks better because it all kind of merged together.
But in 2021. Digital humans, digi-doubles, stunt doubles, which are a bit further away, where we can still see that they're trying to be Tom Cruise or someone, sometimes they still don't look as good. And part of it is I believe, the level of detail. And I'm not saying a further away digidouble you need to add the detail. It's just that you can't put much detail into a further away digidouble. Whereas when a close-up digidouble with pores and wrinkles and redness, you can see all the detail. I think in the Matrix sequels, they exposed that very early on, that challenge, that problem with digidouble.
No, I don't get me wrong. I enjoy the second one. I really don't like the third one, but I do like the second one. The second one is okay. I love the ideas behind
Good
it.
ideas.
The virtual,
Yeah.
The car sequences with the virtual cameras. It looks astonishing. The fight with Mr. Smith. All those sequences are really smart ideas, and it's really cool ideas that really have mind-blowing, groundbreaking visual effects if you think about it. Like the fight with Mr. Smith, especially with the thousands of Mr. Smith, is like really groundbreaking at the time. And I just feel the third one becomes almost like a robo jock film, like it's like a mech film almost, like, and I didn't really enjoy that as much. I thought it was a bit too long, and as much as the visual effects looked outstanding, it was just too much robots and too many droids, and I just didn't felt it fitted in, with the rest.
I had forgotten that both of those sequels came out in 2003. Like both of them.
Yeah, they were
together.
back to back.
It's insane.
They filmed them. Yeah, they filmed them back to back. They filmed them in one single thing. Yeah.
But I just wanted to mention the legacy of it, and I think that early digital human work coupled with bullet time virtual cameras paved the way for knowing that they could create, other filmmakers could create these virtual humans and be photoreal. And, eventually scanning and volumetric capture, which is, you could argue, is still in its infancy, it really is coming into the fore just now. In terms of actual capturing performances, not just capturing scans of the actors and then an animator or a motion capture performer replicating it. But here we're actually in this world now of vocap, where maybe Keanu can get into a vocap stage and actually deliver a Keanu performance. I think that's really exciting, and we're still only at the early period. But I do feel like Matrix is part of that legacy in making that possible.
Absolutely. And it's, absolutely. And it's, I guess that's a segue, isn't it? To talk about what we're going to talk next, which is what was just released really recently by Unreal, which was released for the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X exclusively. For now, it's no PC release yet. And this is called The Matrix Awakens. And a lot of things have been talked about this on the media, and a lot of things have been talked. There's an amazing video, this construction of this from Digital Foundry, which I really recommend. I'll put it on the show notes. People should go and watch. Digital Foundry has made 2 videos where they just construct the entire technology behind it, and including they have an interview with the developers of this demo. But Ian, I really wanted to talk about something you've mentioned off camera with me, which was, there's a really special thing about this demo, isn't it? In terms of who did it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, obviously it's made by Epic Games, but the makers of Unreal Engine. But the leads on this are Kim Libreri, John Gator, and some other people who originally worked on the Matrix films, who now happen to also be working at Unreal Engine. But also, Unreal Engine is now made up of a lot of visual effects artists from the industry. What's really cool is I did recently get to chat to Kim Libreri and John Gator for a real-time conference session, and they sort of talked about how they had this idea after talking to Lana Wachowski, who's the director of Matrix Resurrections, and she was like on board. Like she wrote stuff for this, and then the actors were on board, Keanu and Carrie-Anne Moss. And so they were scanned, for the purposes, and performed for the purposes of this demo. And Hugo, that's what I just want to mention too, because I haven't got this demo because I haven't got a PlayStation 5 or Xbox Series X. But what I liked about seeing this demo, because I'm a film person, I liked that it was the ultimate crossover, right? It's live action, it's pre-rendered Unreal Engine stuff, it's real-time rendered Unreal Engine scenes, plus it's a sandbox Unreal Engine 5 sequence gameplay.
The first one on a console, yeah. We never had one. This is the first time they're showing the Unreal 5 on a console, yeah.
And so I don't know if people love or don't love it, but I love the idea that they've tried to, hey, you love The Matrix? We're going to present a story relating to The Matrix and gameplay. And I think that's cool.
So it is. Like I mean, as you know, I'm a gamer, so I have quite a lot to say about this. I'll try to make it brief, but first of all, like you said, it is fascinating to know that the original team behind the visual effects of First Matrix are now trying to replicate the film that they made 20 years ago, but now in real time. So I just want everyone to sink in this phrase. They've replicated sequences in real time for a film that back then probably took months to render, okay? In real time. So I know it's been 21 years, but on only 21 years, 21 years is not a long time, we've went from rendering in grayscale box and taking fucking weeks to render a frame to have real-time render in 4K of the same scene. So this entire thing is a revolution, and I of course I understand why John Gator wanted to be this. I know why they wanted to be this, because this is as revolutionary as the first Matrix is. And I think people are still not sinking in this thing. It's only the first 5 minutes though. Like the first 5 minutes of this demo is the only moment where you have these shots from the film replicated in Unreal, and they're not perfect. They're not. And if you put them side by side, there's some specularity issues, there's some skin issues, there's some problems, the grain is not completely right, the look is not completely right. I mean, there's some little nuances, but it's so close, Ian. It's so close. And we're talking about in real time. Like, these shots are running in real time. They're not pre-rendered. I mean, not all of them. Some of them are, but not all of them. Especially the shot where Neo is looking at the computer and his eyes open and he's sleeping on the computer. That entire scene is running on a play. And also, like, let's also not forget, people, that this is not running on a PC with, like, 2 graphic cards, 2 Quadro 5000s. No, this is running on a little shitty PlayStation. I have one on the back here. Like a little consumer 400-pound PlayStation with a really, really weak graphic card. Because let's face it, like, a console is never going to be as powerful as a computer. And so this entire thing is running on hardware that is not even from this year. It's like 3 years old already, because a console usually is developed 3 years before. So this is like mind-blowing, okay, watching this in real time running on a system. And I think Unreal outdid themselves. Not everything is good news, though. Like, I think those first 5 minutes are fucking mind-blowing, and you look at them, you're like, I cannot believe. And fortunately, they don't stay with it. I wish that they would have kept going and had maybe a few more shots, and maybe more shots with Neo and more shots with Carrie Moss, because they basically did a crossover with the digital humans, having Neo, like Keanu Reeves, as a digital human, going old and young and old and young. So that's really fascinating. And you can really see the fidelity of how they are. Obviously, don't believe everything you see. Like, when you look at the marketing stills do not match the PlayStation 5 demo. The PlayStation 5 demo is much more grainy, much more defocused, much more low res. The stills, I think, were pre-rendered, although they don't talk about that. They are marketing stills, of course. But I think the whole demo is fascinating. What really falls apart for me, personally, on the demo is when we go to the open world and when we go to the shooting gallery. It falls apart because it becomes just a weak game. You have no control. It's just a shooting gallery. You can't control the car. You can't control anything. It's basically like a quick time event game where you're just pressing a button on the correct moment to activate something. So it becomes almost like an interactive novel and not really a game. So from a game point of view, that becomes a problem. And then the open world itself is fascinating, but also not fascinating. And I'll try to explain, Ian. First of all, from a game's point of view, as much as it's impressive, because, this is the first time we're watching an entire city with hardware Lumen, because Lumen from Unreal used to be software based. This is hardware based Lumen. We have real-time GI. We have ray trace reflections, ray trace shadows. We have everything. Although the ray trace reflections are running at a fourth of resolution of the real thing. So if you put yourself in front of a car, you see that your reflection is like a quarter res. It's not like full res. So there's a lot of issues there. But this is the first time we see these kind of things on a video game. But the performance is so weak. Sometimes my PlayStation can hardly pass the 10 frame per second mark. And I think that is the problem. I think they are trying to shoehorn this demo into a computer that does not have enough power to run it. That's the thing. And so I think that's the issue at the moment. I think that, yes, it looks very impressive and it's very mind-blowing how much they can put into this demo. And I know it's just a demo and it's free. But I'm a bit worried about the performance because we just managed to get the 60 frame per second out of the way on all the games. We had games at 60 frames per second because that's how you should play it. And I'm a bit worried that with Unreal 5, we're going to go back to 24. We're going to go back to 30, which is very cinematic, but it's really difficult to play a game on 24 because of the lag, because of the actual lag you have between the controller and the game, because the game becomes very less responsive when you're playing at 24 or at 30 frames per second. So there's a couple of issues here which I'm a bit worried of. Maybe the Unreal Engine is too powerful for the PlayStation and too powerful for the Xbox, and you probably need like a high-end computer to even run it. I think those things, of course, maybe I'll be wrong, maybe they'll optimize it to hell, but there's a couple of things here that are, mind-blowing, but also really bad. So there's a mixed bag here for me, in terms of performance.
Yeah, having not tried that out, I can't speak for it. But you're right about two things. It's a demo and it's free, and it's kind of trying to showcase UE5. I mean, from what I have seen, people were pretty excited about looking at like crashes and looking at this procedural world that's uses some side effects Houdini stuff, and Unreal Engine stuff as well.
It's very impressive. It's very impressive stuff. Like the whole city is like, it's all the whole city is running at actually not 4K. It's running at when it's on the city, it's at 2880 by 1200. So it's basically 2.5K at 30 frames per second, and then it's upscaled using temporal reconstruction. So it's basically upscaled to 4K, which is another feature that Unreal 5 has, which is really impressive to see. And then when it's on the cinematic mode, when you're watching Neo and you're watching the beginning, that one is actually running even lower. It's actually running below 2.5K. It's actually kind of 2K at 24 because they've pumped up the quality. And then it's upscaled to 4K again with temporal reconstruction. So that's the impressive part of it, is the fact that they are actually rendering really low resolution, but then the system is upscaling and sharpening to invent detail where it doesn't exist. And I think that's the most impressive part of it.
And look, what you're talking about is things like frame rate, fidelity, whatnot. I think, yes, that's going to be an important thing to consider going forward for
I'm
UE5
talking about it
games,
from the perspective. I'm talking about perspective from the video games industry. That's what I've mentioned at the beginning. The perspective I just gave was talking as a gamer. I was worried about the performance hit that they had on this game. But as a filmmaker and as a visual effects artist, as this podcast is, this is really exciting. That's the thing. Yeah. The way that this could be used, not on games, but in film and in visual effects.
I just found myself getting really excited that, yes, it's The Matrix, and yes, John Gator and Kim LeBerry and others have relationships with Lana Wachowski and Keanu and Carrie Ann and could get them involved. But it got me excited about, well, could future films and future games have much more of a crossover? I know that they've been talking about convergence between film and games forever. And yes, there are films based on games and games based on films. But I don't feel like the filmmakers are as heavily involved. And again, we're just talking about a demo here. So I was kind of excited that if this was deemed successful, that there would be more of this type of thing. And, you know, if Warner Brothers is running that show, they would be into it for their films. Or Marvel might be, or Disney.
We've been burned. We've been burned before. Most games based on films are bad, and even Matrix games. You know, we had two games: The Enter the Matrix and The Path of Neo. They were two games done by Atari and Warner Bros. Back in the early 2010s. They were terrible games as well, and so we've been burned in the past where most films, most crossovers don't work. And the reason why they don't work is a lot of reasons. Like sometimes it's because the filmmakers don't have any knowledge of games, and so they don't know the game, and so they try to shoehorn the thing. And that's what's kind of happening with the Uncharted film. It kind of looks a bit weird. You can kind of look at the trailers that have been coming out and think, have they played the game? Because it doesn't look like they've played the game. So there's a bunch of that problem coming over. And then the other way around as well, where you have sometimes directors coming into the games industry, they've never played games. So they might think this cinematic thing that we just watched on The Matrix Awaken is amazing, but most gamers don't care about this. Gamers want control. They don't want to see a film. They want to they want to play something. So that's why I don't want to sound negative. I just found the experience lackluster from a gamer point of view. As a gamer, I thought it was okay. I've played much better. You know, I feel like from a gaming point of view, they didn't even try much. It's just it's literally a glorified tech demo. That's what it is. And yes, I know what you mean, like with the crossover, but I personally don't want the crossover because I feel like these are two different things. You know, like I feel like games are games and films are films, and they should exist, and that's it. Like I don't. This forcing of trying to have crossover never goes well unless we're going to wait a couple of more generations, because I think that now most likely the directors that are now starting to direct now, they were people playing games when they were younger, so maybe that will make a difference, and so the connection will be different. And the same way goes, like the opposite will go around as well. But I just feel that the connection never really connects because the two sides don't know exactly what they're doing.
Well, but that's
it's
my
almost
point,
like there's no,
Hugo. Isn't that one of the problems, that it's always been a game developer making the game and a film studio making the film? What if it was more tied in? What if it was?
Well, I think it's going to take a long time for that to happen, because most of the times the filmmakers disregard games. You know, they think, oh, this is just for kids. So a lot of times you see filmmakers saying that games are not interesting for them. And then the game development people keep saying, oh, I don't want to do films, I want to do games. So you have kind of, they're basically with their backs to each other. And that's kind of the issue, I think, you know.
There are a few companies relatively recently that have talked a lot more about this. Skydance is one of them. And they still haven't quite announced, or maybe they have announced what they're doing. But I'm just curious, from a person that understands that relationship hasn't always gone that well, film and games, that I think this is possibly the start of people thinking about it differently, which is what needs to happen. It is.
Perhaps. And also, I think Unreal is doing a really fantastic job on that, because when you look at this open world demo, which, by the way, people should go and try. There are certain places in the city where you can switch off the lights and have it at nighttime. It's much more beautiful at nighttime. People should go and check that out. This demo really proves that they have a working sandbox, you know, because now we have proper bounce light, proper GI, proper ray tracing, proper shadows, proper reflections. Even the sky is a self-illuminating surface that ray traced directly into the surface of the buildings. So now you get proper photorealistic reflections and proper photorealistic shadows. Nothing is baked and nothing is faked. So it could become the ultimate sandbox. Of course, at the moment, it can become the ultimate sandbox for animatics and for storyboarding and for boarding a film. But I can see a moment where certain filmmakers might even take the plunge in doing entire films on this thing. Because if you look, and that's exactly what Unreal is trying to do. If you think about it, of course, they have the gaming division, which is producing games, and that's still going to happen. But I feel like somehow with the digital humans, with the lumen, with all these retraced reflections, it really becomes a set. That's the cool thing about it. I'm not talking about virtual production. I'm talking about CG film. Like I'm talking about like full CG film. It becomes a set. You can bring in the assets from the Epic store. You can bring in the assets from the digital humans. You can bring in the assets. All even imported their assets from Maya and from Houdini, and you can really literally now create a full CG film with Unreal, and I think that's where they're coming from, and that's why this demo becomes so impressive in that sense.
I think you're dead right. And how can we also not say, but we're not going to talk about it, Hugo, the word metaverse?
I know.
We're just going to say that word. We're just going to say it. It's the metaverse. We're just going to say it. And it, of course, is very meta, being the Matrix within a game, within Unreal Engine. All right. It's time to wrap up. But, of course, what we want to tell people is two things. Thank you so much for supporting VFX Notes. We just love doing this. I'm just going to go ahead and make a big announcement for next year, Hugo, unless we already have said this. But we're going to be going weekly.
Yeah,
this is a huge commitment. A huge commitment. But Hugo's up for it. He's ready to video edit 24 hours a day. Send him your videos. So that's happening in 2022. The other thing is, of course, thank you to people who are looking at our Patreons. And, of course, if you're a Patreon subscriber for Hugo's Desk or Befores and Afters, you get to see these videos 3 days earlier than everyone else. So that's our thank you to you. And we really appreciate that support.
And to add to that, I would also say another announcement. I can also say not only it's going to be weekly, but also for our Patreons. If you want to support it, don't forget to go to Hugo's Desk and to Before and After's Patreon. On the lowest tier, you can support it and get it 3 days before. And also from 2022, we don't know when, but we will also have certain episodes that will be exclusive for Patreons. We're also doing that as well. We're also doing certain content that will be exclusive for Patreons. That's very exciting.
They will only be about the film speed. They will be
that's
about
right. Yes.
each 5-minute block
don't say that. Don't
of
say
the
that.
film speed. Just letting everyone know.
Are we waiting for that one when it's what, the 100th episode? Is that the film we're gonna do on the 100th episode? We're gonna do the speed? Is that what's gonna happen?
No, we're doing
just waiting
multiple episodes. No, we're not. All right.
And I also would love to thank our sponsors as well, of course, by supporting our podcast as well and the adventures we're doing here. So thank you so much, guys, for sponsoring both ftrack and also Action VFX. Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's really exciting to have them on board. All right, Hugo. Great to see you in the Matrix. Great to see you in the metaverse. Would you have taken the red pill or the blue pill? Just wondering.
I don't know, man. I don't know. I love food, and pizzas are my thing. I don't know, man. I think I would keep eating pizzas. I don't know about that mush that they eat on the Nebuchadnezzar. I don't know. Supposedly it has everything you need, but I'm not sure about that.
Tastes like rust. All right.
Oh my God.
Thanks so much, Hugo. Always a blast. Thanks everyone for listening and watching. Talk to you guys soon.
Okay.
Thanks. Bye.